Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Transparency Committee. My name is Councillor Gerard Hargreaves. I'm chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is being live streamed on YouTube, and members of the public and media are also welcome to watch this meeting remotely and listen to this discussion that will take place. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Committee Room 1 and those people who are watching on YouTube. Before we proceed, can I ask everybody to make sure their phones are switched off or put it on silent or something, and that will be good. I think it will be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. I'd like you to join me now, please, in 72 seconds of silence. We now turn to the agenda that we have in front of us. Apologies for absence. I received apologies from Councillor Simmons and Andrew Ling. And that's everybody, so there's no other apologies. I'd like to welcome Maxine to our meeting. This is the first time you've joined us.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much for having me.
I look forward to having you and learning from your wisdom as we go through the agenda. Thank you. Okay. With the minutes of the previous meetings. Oops, sorry, before that, we need to go through declarations of interest. Any member, anything they wish to declare? Thank you. So we now go to apology for absence. It's done, and we now go then to minutes. So we've got two sets of minutes before me. So the minutes from the 6th of March, which is our last full meeting in here. Can I take those as a true record of our meeting and sign them? Thank you.
I've only got one small comment. On page 13, we say picked up with scrutiny. Is it not scrutiny and oversight committee?
Overview and scrutiny.
Yeah.
Let me just amend that. Thank you.
And it's mentioned twice.
So which page was that?
Page 13.
And then I have the minutes from the brief meeting at the end of the last council meeting on the 24th of May when we elected the chair and vice chair. Can I take those as a true record of our meeting? Thank you. So we now go for a 5-year update on development A4, informing audit risk, sorry. A4. Who's going to lead us on this? David, do you want to start us off on this, or
I think I'm happy to hand over to
Paul? Are you going to go straight into this? Great, thanks.
I am, thank you. So I'll take the report as read, but probably just to flag its purpose. So obviously we've got our name across it, but the purpose of it is for us to ask various questions of management around various topics to support our audit processes. So what you have is the various questions that we ask and the responses from management. So and then in terms of good governance, it's here for your information, so you can see some of the assessments, some of the judgments that management are making in terms of production of their financial statements. So I wasn't going to go into any of the detail, but if there's any questions, either I can cover them or something from management can.
You just confirm, this is a sort of standard, the questions that are asked are standard, obviously the answers are relevant to us, but this is just a standard questionnaire that would go out for anybody.
That's right. So it's something that's been developed in the last few years. A lot of it comes out of various corporate failures that have taken place where there's been a suggestion that those charged with governance might not be aware of some of the judgments and decisions that management are making. So really it's that opportunity for us for the transparency, for you to be able to see the type of questions that we're asking and the responses from management.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Anybody wish to, Liz, do you wish to?
Yeah, I just wondered, sorry, on page 26, if someone could explain to me what a capitalisation direction is that we've requested from the Secretary of State. I didn't understand that. And then also, on that same general inquiries, I didn't quite understand the answer to question 6.
So I'm happy to make the start, Chair, on capitalisation direction. I'm sure many colleagues will help me out. Normally, local authorities where there is financial difficulty will approach government for a capitalisation direction when they haven't sufficient funds to meet the budgetary requirements and then borrow to be able to balance the books. In RBKC's case, obviously we've had the unique situation with Grenfell tragedy where we have had and dealt with and now settled a significant number of civil claims in relation to the Grenfell Tower fire. So that's something where the authority has approached government to be able to recognise and to be able to support the borrowing that's required to be able to pay that in the short term, while other work is undertaken to seek to recover costs incurred by the council to be able to cover those compensation payments. But we're required, because it goes outside of our normal borrowing requirements and our normal budgeting, to approach the Secretary of State for permission to do so. I think Paul wants to.
No, I think that's summarised it. So we're waiting for the Secretary of State to come back.
Yeah, and question 6, I think I didn't understand what an LCIV class was.
That's the answer of 3-letter abbreviation.
So the council, along with other local authorities in London, as part of the London, is it collective investment vehicle for pension fund investments? You might have seen some media coverage recently around that. But actually, so there is a contribution each authority makes into the management and administration of the fund. I'm not sure if there's a particular stream whether you can on question 6 in terms of response or page 27.
It's page 27, yeah.
Yes, so we're effectively saying we're going to pay them the position. It's the shorthand.
Okay.
If you want any more information on that, can get that.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think it helps. And I think the only other point I had is under accounting estimates in question 1. We didn't include. Sorry, no, put the page down. Accounting estimates.
Page 49.
Yeah. Page 49. Yeah. We put classes of transactions that are significant to the financial statements and accounting estimates related disclosures. Levels of reinvestments were not included, and I saw those in the subsequent plan as a source of uncertainty.
There's on page 37, they've mentioned the reinvestment.
Yeah, they're there, but they're not in these general inquiries. So is that enough to put it on page? Which page are you on now?
On 37, appendix A.
Well, Paul, do you want to?
I can't.
Do you want to comment on that, because the answers really are to make new grant quantum content. Would you like it repeated there?
No, I think content with what we've received. So we obviously make our own judgments and assessments on those estimates anyway. So we'll use what's disclosed in the financial statements. So.
Okay.
Thank you. I had a question on page 35, question 10. I want to ask, Robin, what do you think of
this answer, but how does it compare to what other local authorities will be saying? This is a fraud and corruption perspective.
What page is this? I'm
Your page
Page 15.
What question number?
number 10. That one.
And overriding control.
You help if I read it out.
No, I'm just reading, I'm just making sure that I've got. I think that's a reasonable response. So that if from a perspective of others, risk here would be where there's a particular single point of failure, for example, in an organisation. So most big would be a smaller council where there's relying on one person to do make decisions or even to approve things or be able to do things like that. So that question, I don't guess it's an unreasonable response to say that there isn't any. There's obviously appropriate checks and balances then with the different roles you've got in place. So quite
I agree with Paul there. So I think we're from an internal point of view, we would look at segregation of duties so that one person didn't have overall control of the process all the way through. So if it was making large payments out of the council bank account, for example, and you've got a series of people involved in the process, there's that segregation to ensure that one person couldn't then perpetrate fraud through the process.
And then page 20 of your report, item 2, the impact of rules and regulations. I want to know, so these breaches, if there are any obligations under local government, hasn't go to leadership, should they come to the audit committee? Direction of law reports any breaches, not necessarily being to the audit and transparency committee.
So like it says, depending on what the nature of the breaches, we can
So
take
what
that
is the threshold, and who sets the threshold, and is that something that?
So I think that may be in the constitution, but we'll take that away to check before you give you a proper response.
Yeah.
I have one quick question on page 31 of the fraud risk assessment. Question 2. Page 11 of the grant Thornton report.
Okay.
Page 31 of the grant. And it was in relation to the classes of accounts, transactions and disclosures most at risk to fraud, and whether Grant Thornton actually recommends extra or additional measures to prevent those highest levels of risk that have been identified by you, or you simply just saying these are where we think there are some real problems. You don't make any recommendations to tackle those.
So these are management responses
Yeah.
where we believe the highest levels of risk to be are. So we would make sure through the work that Andy's team, the accounts fraud team, does in terms of their proactive fraud reviews, or actually directed pieces of work around preventing fraud are done, but also in the audit plan as well. We'd look to make sure we're covering these areas again to give assurance around the general controls, some of which would include fraud controls. Also, there's our assessments for Grant Thornton to consider, and then to think about the work they would do as part of their testing.
Okay, so the follow-on question then, if those are the management controls that come from the council, are they different to what Grant Thornton would suggest are the highest risk areas, the ones that require most scrutiny? Because what I'm trying to get at is Grant Thornton is an independent group. Can't look at this independently. Can Grant Thornton tell us that these are the areas that are most at risk, and whether they dovetail with what management says or don't? I'd like to understand that process.
Well, so there's two elements to this. So when we're doing, so we've asked this question because equally when we're doing our audit procedures, we actually focus quite a lot on the potential risk around management override controls. So this question is coming from the perspective of what the external risks from fraud to you, so the points that where there could be an opportunity for fraud. A lot of our audit work is actually focused on the potential risk around actually management manipulating the financial statements. So we'll do quite a lot of our audit procedures will actually be designed detecting that type of fraud. So around we're looking at journals or around revenue recognition. They're the two things that every audit, regardless of the sector, awards automatic risk under auditing standards. So we have a different view on the risks around fraud, but this question is focused primarily on the risks that the council is exposed to from essentially from individuals that might set out to fraud the council. The response is reasonable. They some think I would expect to see written down, and equally then you would then, as we've discussed, I would expect then that there would be mechanisms in place, be it internal audit program or other sources of assurances that you might have that would be in place to detect that type of fraud and to provide you with assurance on that.
And therefore, the final question is there anywhere in the Grant Thornton report where Grant Thornton independently assesses what the highest risks are to the audit process, irrespective of what management is suggesting answering your question?
So yes, when we issue our, not obviously this is a slightly different document, but when we issue our plan, we articulate the areas that we think are the most significant. That's the terminology that auditors use, and we will direct most of our work in those areas, and then our final report should loop back, and all the things we said we would do, the final report should basically explain what we've done in those areas. So you'll see, as I said, the focus will be very much on management override controls. That's where the risk is from the audit perspective.
In the last few years, your annual audit plan recognises that as a national risk, which you reflect back to us, council.
Yes.
This is, I mean, in reading this document, there's a lot of duplication in other reports, isn't there? And I read it thinking this is important, but it's covered. A lot of these are covered elsewhere, or what's not in here is covered elsewhere. So it's
It is belt and braces.
Yeah, it's belt and braces.
It's asking a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's covering everything in one document. So.
Am I correct in thinking that when the audit comes, there's that letter the council writes to the auditors and says that we've done due diligence, and this actually would be additional extra due diligence, which is actually helpful to us to be able to say, yes, we've looked at another layer of assurances.
Yeah, so this is kind of informing our risk processes. So if you said things, if you gave either assurances and said, actually, we've got this fraud that we're aware of and it's X amount, either that might direct us to be interested in looking at that, or equally if we thought there were responses that were not satisfactory and there were potential areas of weaknesses. So for example, we said, well, actually, we don't know what our areas of risk are, etc. We don't know if there are any outstanding legal claims. That might actually make us think that that is an area of high risk that we would want to focus on. So this is kind of informing our planning process. And then you're right, that letter at the end, the management representation letter is not dissimilar. It's at the end, it's also giving assurances and saying actually all these things that you've asked.
President Cody, you wanted to ask a question?
I did, thank you very much. Yes, I wanted to say this amount of money that we're trying to capitalise, which I think is some kind of loan from the government, we seem to be fairly confident that's going to happen. Thank goodness for that. My understanding is, I may be wrong, that this at some point is going to be paid back by this court case against Arconic and Whirlpool that came up a while back, that I think it was to pay the compensation amounts that we were going through this process. The case against Arconic and Whirlpool, it came up this time last year. Is that the case? Is this the money that we're expecting to pay this off, or is
What
that something
question
else?
are you? What part of the
I'm
report are you
generally
on?
talking about capitalisation that we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
this whole process. And are we, generally with a bigger picture, are we relying on a successful court case against Arconic and Whirlpool to pay that back in due course?
Okay.
That's all.
I don't know quite how that relates to this report, but do you want to make any general comment on that?
So the capitalisation direction is very much setting out how the council is going to fund the civil claims compensation. So it's not, it will do through a range of things, including using capital receipts and some borrowing. The intention is, and as Councillor Denko has mentioned, that there are a number of other defendants who are involved in both the civil claims process and have been involved in public inquiry, where the council will be seeking to recover some of its costs in terms of response and recovery efforts, which will then be used to repay any borrowing.
So I'm vaguely right on that.
That's the broad link what we're trying to do. It's across all the defendants.
Keep an eye on that one.
Across all the defendants.
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, Paul, just can I ask you then, is there anything in the responses from the council that you think is missing, that's weak, that doesn't cover in the way you'd like it to be covered?
No, I'm happy with the responses. I think they're thoughtful and they're suitably thorough where they need to be. So.
It's not us to say this, but members of the committee, is there anything that hasn't been asked, if you like?
It is for the committee to say as well.
I mean, it's a standard document, but if there's anything that you think is missing, it would be useful to know. Bearing in mind there are various other documents to complement this. Okay, so we're asked to note this, and that's fine. So, Paul, thank you very much for coming. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Or you may choose.
It probably there was something I just wanted to say as well. We would have expected to have brought our audit plan for 22-23 to this meeting. The plan has been produced, but it's on hold because DLUC are thinking about various options in terms of how they might solve some of the backlogs in place, and also what that means for 22-23 audit. So we're not quite clear at the moment the exact scope of the audit, even though we are starting next week. But yeah, so there's some uncertainty around some of the areas that we might or might not be covering. So at the moment we've held off on the plan. If we don't get anything by the paper deadline for the next committee in July, I think what we'll do is we'll just issue it as indicative and say this is, to the best of our knowledge at this time, this is where we think the work will be directed, but that could be subject to change. So sorry there's not more clarity. That is where we are.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for joining us this evening. Let's move on to the next item, which is the update on the developmental risk management strategy. And David and Maxine, you're going to lead us into this, aren't you?
That's right. And I'm just going to kick us off. And so, as this is my first visit to the Audit and Transparency Committee, thank you very much for inviting me and having me. And I thought it might just be worth me just giving a few reflections on, I think, where my take, having been here a few months, of where I think we are at on that kind of on the overall approach to risk management and what we're undertaking at the moment to shake it up a bit. And I have had a meeting with the chair, which thank you very much, and also so have some insights from the committee as to kind of what you find easy and difficult when trying to kind of penetrate risk management within the council. So the first thing that I would say, when I first arrived in the council, on the first day I had a meeting with the Section 151 officer, and on the second day I had a meeting with David as the Director of Audit, Risk and Fraud, because, you know, that the very first thing that you're doing in that first week is seeking assurance as to the kind of, you know, what assurance do we have in place, what does it look like. So we have something called the Risk and Control Board, which is essentially my executive management team with David to go through the strategic risk register, to do a whole host of other things which is providing that assurance and really is feeding into Audit and Transparency Committee with the work that you do. And my first impressions, which I think have been borne out over the last few months, were that we had a pretty solid foundation for risk management that we had introduced, that there had been a real need for rapidly improving the maturity of how we did that post 2017, that actually that had been done, and there now is a pretty good structure and rhythm to what goes on. Now, that's not exactly the same as saying that every risk is well understood and interrogated by all the council officers, partners and the committee. I think our job is to make the committee's life easier in terms of actually interrogating the risks. And one of the things that Gerard, as the chair, fed back to me was really wanting to be able to hone in on things that felt inherently risky, or where you just weren't satisfied by the answers that you had. And so I've taken that away as part of our job to kind of signpost what those might be. I was interested in the deep dive topics you'd chosen, and that kind of fragility of the care market in particular seems to be one that is, it's a really good one for the committee to focus on. The other things that I picked up were that kind of wanting to get a sense of the trends over time around risk management, and really wanting to have very crisp, clear mitigation actions, not ones that just say ongoing. I think we might ban the word ongoing. So if it materialises, my apologies. So, But I guess overall risk management is part of our overall approach to governance, grip and transparency. It is one aspect of governance, grip and transparency. And I think there are a couple of things I wanted to talk to the committee about that broader overall approach that we've brought in as a management team. So something that I am very keen on in terms of the culture of the executive management team, the executive directors, is that it is incumbent upon all of us to have a curiosity about each other's business. So all substantial matters of business within a department need to come through that executive management team for some, sort of internal rigour and challenge. And we have built in already improvements to the oversight of key decision process before it gets into the member arena, so that there is kind of good oversight of decisions. So you don't take a decision over here that has an impact over there that nobody has thought about. We've convened a specific group to both deliver on the commitments in the council plan, to provide that oversight and grip of delivery of the commitments in the council plan, and also to oversee sort of transformation and delivery of savings and the actual actions that will deliver on the medium-term financial strategy savings. So those are a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight to you, and we're currently in the process of reviewing our grip on capital delivery, because you will know from some of the reports that you've had that we have seen slippage. Now, that's not, this council's not alone in having seen that sort of slippage, but we have had that slippage, and I really want us to, and the kind of speed of the capital programme is quite variable across the council. So, for example, the housing capital programme that's about planned maintenance on our buildings is really going at pace now, but some other some other projects are lagging behind that. So we want to try and get a level of consistency into that. So in terms of the approach to risk management, you have got the paper here, both in terms of the refresh of the 2018 risk management strategy. So what we're trying to do really is to make sure that there's a really consistent approach, that we are clear about what effect the mitigation is having on the risk level, and to have some sort of robust assessment and challenge on that. And we're also planning to kind of train a whole group of staff who are involved in risk management, and just taking note of the fact as well that we've had significant amount of churn in the staff that we have over the last few years. Certainly since 2018, we've had over 1,000 people join and leave the council during that time. So it's really important that we keep refreshing that, and we keep retraining, so we've got that kind of organisational grip and organisational memory. What we've agreed recently to do at Risk and Control Board, which is slightly similar to the approach you're looking to take, is to have that departmental. Every risk will be owned by an executive director. Is owned by an executive director. Risk management is something that's on all of the departmental management teams, and that has to be regularly reviewed. As we come together as Risk and Control Board, we are going to be focusing on particular risks at particular times. So we've got Risk and Control Board this week, coming up on Wednesday, and this time we're going to be looking at the work that's been done on resilience and our plans on resilience, because emergency planning is a big feature of our risk of the corporate risk register, the strategic risk register. So we're going to be kind of really just road testing that and just taking the opportunity to dig deep into that, rather than for it to be a line on a spreadsheet with a list of actions against it. So that's the start of our new approach. I'll stop there, and I don't know whether you wanted to say anything else, David.
Thank you, Maxine. I think that's really helpful, and I think Maxine coming in as new chief executive has really helped actually to energise what we're doing in terms of risk management, and actually to refresh what Risk and Control Board is doing, which I think is really important. I think we're looking at developing this risk strategy as an evolution rather than a revolution. So we set out in 2018 very much focused on resident-facing risks and risks that were important and impacted on residents, which I think is the right thing to do. I think it's, as Maxine says, it's how we make sure we embed this throughout the organisation, both through training and awareness of staff, but also looking at how we extend it beyond directorates into projects and programmes. So again, we've got a consistent approach. We've got a number of key projects and programmes that are either underway or planned. And it's how we take the opportunity more effectively, both at Risk and Control Board and here at the Audit Committee, to be able to challenge and understand in a bit more depth how some of these individual risks are being managed, how you get assurance that they are being managed well, given that on the strategic register these are inherently high risks which we know don't change dramatically over time. But what we're looking to do is shape the way in which the risks are recorded, to have very clear, time-limited actions that are intended to mitigate the risks. So you'll see those come through when we next report to you in terms of how we've got some clear risks with clear targets, clear timescales, not ongoing, to make sure that you can see what we're doing to mitigate particular aspects of those risks.
One of the issues certainly we found is the presentation of that report.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any thoughts of how are you going to present that differently?
Yes, we are. Some more graphical information around trends, but also some a lot less narrative. So you've got a clear summary of where the risk is currently, and a clear set of actions that are the next steps.
And whether it's gone up and down.
And the trends and the direction of travel. So all that's going to be incorporated into the new template to make sure we capture all the feedback we've had from the board.
And when will we see that template? Because one of the concerns I had, I didn't really feel it was particularly strategic register. I mean, it's 21 pages long. It's quite detailed, and I think that's particularly strategic.
So that's where we're trying to get to. We have less of the detail, but there's the focus on the strategic issues. So what we're doing currently is about to road test the template with a couple of the executive directors to take the current risks and to say, right, let's see how we work this now in terms of this new template, and then hopefully bring those forward to you in the autumn. Is the plan.
That's what I'm saying.
And I think what we want to do is at Risk and Control Board, rather than, and again, Maxine made this point actually after the first meeting, there's a risk we sit and go through the whole register as you were doing, and say, well, actually, is that score right? Is that narrative right? And actually not focusing on the details of the key risks. And I think so that's
when you present people with a huge amount of detail,
yes,
they look at it, but then you extract from what is potentially the key issue there.
So we need to do the totality, and we're going to formally, and we're suggesting that if the committee are happy, we'll do the same here in terms of the new risk register. And then to be able to have those sort of deep dive conversations, both at Risk and Control, but actually here, but actually have you involved in terms of telling us what you want to see the report cover. So rather than a report being presented to you for how a particular risk is being managed, I think it's important we get your input where you're happy to do that with the particular exec director, to be able to say, these are the particular aspects of the risk you're most interested in or want to find out more about.
It makes you have a bit more experience outside, but I've always felt the 2 or 3 deep dives we have really been deep dives. They've been
Yes.
officers
Yes.
reporting to us on the risk rather than a deep dive.
Deep dive.
So again, any thoughts that you have, and maybe we need to be a bit crisper on our thinking of what we want the deep dive to do. I guess the problem is you're trying to do it in 20 minutes or half an hour in a meeting, which it's not desperately deep dive, but it seems like.
Thank you. So, I mean, a good example of that might be, I mean, my take is that actually the risks are described, they're about the right level and they are described in quite a strategic way. But I think what you then get is an awful lot of operational detail, and it's quite difficult as the committee to work out whether that speaks to the strategic risk. So if I look at the one about, the failure to establish corporate mechanisms for planning policy development, and within that you've got something about the MTFS. Well, obviously the massive pressure on public spending at the moment is inflation and what that means in terms of pay demands, contract inflation, and whether or not the assumptions that we are making in the MTFS are the right assumptions, and whether that allows us to do appropriate financial management. So if we were having a deep, I'm not suggesting that's the topic, but if you were having a deep dive, then it would be maybe some sort of bit of pre-thought in terms of we'd like to focus in on inflation, the impact of inflation, or something along those lines. The other thing is, I think as a group of officers, we need to take that steer that you're not looking to be overly assured, because that isn't particularly reassuring, and that isn't really enabling you to do the job of the committee that you want to do. So you're always wanting people to say, we've got this covered, we're quite concerned about these things, which is not a reflection on council performance necessarily, but it's usually a reflection of the external environment and how we're able to manage that external environment. And I think sort of making sure it's not a kind of monotone, and making sure that we're highlighting to you the areas where we think risks are on the up in terms of trend. So counter-terrorism might be another one where that external environment is and obviously we've only got a relatively small part to play in that in terms of statutory agencies, but the impact of such an event would be dramatic.
Let's go then.
On page 65, you talk about, in the bullet point, you talk about register every 6 months, and then, it's the last week. You then talk about 2 meetings in a 6-month cycle, where you have an in-depth. And I look at that and I kind of go, how are you going to respond to the radical risk, the urgent risk? And if you select that in the previous cycle, who's to say it's then out of date? I mean, you saw last year that inflation was just moving at a normal time, and actually one of the frustrations I think with the time for audit committee, you get this back to back in June, July, and then massive gap. So for me, it's actually how do you flag the risk, and do you have the rapid response within your own team to be flagging?
So I think there are 2 things there, if I may first. So first of all, directorate management teams, as Maxine says, we're discussing risks on a regular basis, so we expect those to come forward to the MT. We've also opened on to the next page, the first one on the next page. At each meeting, I've got an opportunity to pick up on new emerging risks as well. So again, it's not saying you've got to wait 6 months before we can talk about that. It's actually making sure each meeting, if something new or significant is coming forward, that we would pick up that opportunity then to have a discussion. I think just to go on another point Maxine made, actually, I think as a committee, don't feel constrained when we go forward on these deep dives to think about picking a particular risk on the register. It's a theme, so inflation might be a good theme, safeguarding might be another theme, where it runs through a number of the risks, and you'd rather have or want to have a detailed conversation about a theme, then please, I don't feel like you're constrained by the register to look at a particular risk setting.
Liz, do you have anything else?
No, that was fine, thank you.
No. Just on point 5.3, just can you perhaps, you've touched on it now, but just about the cycle and how we're going to work with that cycle and how...
Yeah. So what I'd like to do, Chair, is work with Callum and yourself to make sure the forward plan will show you when Risk and Control Board is formally reviewing the strategic register every 6 months. and then we'll work with you well in advance about what you want to do in other meetings you have in between when the election doesn't come. So we can set up some deep dive themes or particular areas where we can have a conversation with you and the relevant exec director about what you want to come forward in terms of the discussion piece for that next meeting. That's okay.
Yeah.
So we want to try and do it so that you will see the register after EMT have seen it each time.
And this gets back to that point that we discussed, having that yearly cycle of what
exactly.
happens throughout the year, so we know what. Maxine, your thoughts. Where does the weed sit and scrutiny sit and the select committee sit? Because do we feel that they are doing enough scrutiny of the risks within their area, or do they tend to leave it to us? Or what's the? Because I don't see on the select committees I sit on, we spend a huge amount of time on risk, which means then it all falls on us. How do other councils play wisdom?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I mean, your role is looking at that, the governance, the regulatory and control, the risk environment, the conduct transparency audit. So, I mean, risk management is part of any project programme, underpins performance of a department. So, whenever anything is reported to a select committee or to overview and scrutiny committee, then the people presenting should always be able to speak about the kind of, the risks that exist and the management of those risks. The officer level risk and control bodies where a lot of that stuff is kind of formalised, and similarly, I suppose, in the mirror is that audit and transparency is the way that it's formalised at the member level. However, every project and programme should have a risk register. I'm not confident at the moment that it does, and that's something that we so that's something that we need to work on, and that's through this strategy it will be making that happen. The other thing could just be with the select committees, perhaps the chair's discussion, just talking about there's a couple of good questions that could and should be asked. I know that select committees do and should always be looking at for example, the regulatory environment which exists. So that, when we were talking about earlier, that compliance with law and regulation is and that horizon scanning is something that the scrutiny committees should be looking at.
Should.
And actually, again, in the past, the audit committee has referred particular issues around risk to scrutiny committees for consideration. So again, there's a way in which you can make sure, or you can help to inform the agenda of the work programme of the scrutiny committees by saying, actually, we think you should be looking in more detail at this area. We look at it from a risk perspective, it's a wider perspective in terms of the performance, in terms of decision making, and how it's operating.
I mean, I suppose an example of that might be fire safety in our housing stock, where obviously it's front and centre on the risk register, but it is something that the Housing Community Select Committee, spends quite a bit of time on as well, and you would expect them to be on top of the operational detail of what was happening in terms of the programmes on estate. And here you would be looking for, in terms of that, you're almost, that's one element of that scrutiny is one element of the overall kind of checks and balances that happen that you as a committee are taking a view about.
What also concerns me is previously with risk registers is that you often got the impression that every department was asked to provide their top 10, whereas actually, for example, children's services might have top 15, whereas customer services might only have 5. And actually, I think we need that flexibility.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Which we do. So again, looking back before 2018, that's exactly how the corporate risk register was put together. It was a case of the biggest risks floating to the top, as it were, from directorates, and it was an aggregation. But actually, that's what we changed in 2018. It was very much about what do executive management teams see as the key risks the authority is facing. So it wasn't looking for making sure you had an equal number from each director and talks about which ones are the key risks the authority faces. But there is a risk, yeah, that's what.
Any other comments we'd like to make on that? So, a few thoughts to go back in terms of how we tie your cycle with our cycle.
Yeah.
How we perhaps handle the deep dive better, and I like your idea of themes and topics rather than maybe just picking a risk out. Because very few issues have just got relate to one area of the council or one piece. So good stuff. But thank you for that, Maxine, and again, you're welcome to stay for that whole.
So I am planning to stay. I would like to. I would like to be here for that whole committee, and I would be helpful wherever I can.
Good. So we now move to item. Hang on. We just give that free time. Go to item number 6 now. Good. So who's going to lead us on this? David, who's going to lead us on this, please?
First of all, I'd like to apologise for the delay in bringing this update report to you. And just to be clear, it is an update report, it's not the final report, so there's an opportunity for further discussion with the committee in terms of shaping the report, in terms of the further work that we've identified in the report that we think we need to be doing. So we're at a situation where the committee has for some time been discussing and grappling with the sort of how we get assurance over the significant sums of money the council spent in relation to its response and recovery activities following the Grenfell tragedy. And obviously what we had in May 21 was a really helpful analysis that Town Eves, the former Director of Financial Management, provided, which was a 4-year revenue and capital sort of assessment, analysis of expenditure by the key headings. And that's been the basis on which we then took forward this piece of work, which came out of discussions very helpful with the independent members in terms of how we would go about shaping this sort of assurance map, and also in terms of how we would then come back to the committee to report on the outcome of that work. So what we've been seeking to do is follow the sort of scope we agreed with the committee, with the input of the independent members. We've done a lot of analysis, particularly around, up to now, around the work that's been done by other agencies, so other agencies other than the external auditor. So we were very conscious at the time that work the external auditor was done was at one level, but the committee wanted to get further assurance or see what further assurances there were. So we have spent a lot of time trying to focus on work done by the GLA and the government auditors. What we've seen actually is that the authorities' records are very clear and structured in terms of demonstrating evidence in the expenditure the council entered into and claimed through grants and also was reimbursed through grants. So I think, albeit we haven't got to the point where we've seen the kind of what we'd expect to the audit reports from government and GLA around their work, what we have seen clearly is evidence that grants that were claimed were paid and were signed off by government and GLA to pay over. So I think on that aspect, where we've got some more comfort there about the assurance that other parties have done, I think what we now need to just focus on, and with the committee's help, is be clear about what further work internally we can now do to bring the matter to a point where we have some closure, but also be providing the assurance that you're looking for. I think again, just coming back to the points that have been made by the chair previously, we're focusing on how the money was spent, not what it was spent on. So that's the role that we've sought to undertake through this. I think it's really important we're able to do that for you. But happy that, given that there were a number of new members of the committee, I thought it was important to give context as well. So maybe the report was perhaps a little more detailed than some members may have wanted, but wanted to make sure we've got the context there for you. But happy to pause there.
Okay, Liz, do you want to sort of lead on the response to this? Because as we said, it was the independents had a huge input in this to start with, and you are the sole survivor tonight.
I'm the sole survivor of the independent members. Yeah, I mean, this was something that I think we requested some time ago, and we wanted some assurance over the accuracy of the Grenfell expenditure. And initially, I think in late 2021, we went out to the audit firms and had conversations with them, but we became aware there'd already been a certain amount of audit work done by other parties for their own assurance and also internal audit, etc. So we saw that there was merit in actually collating all that information. I think, thank you very much for, it's quite a long report and fully appreciate that. But I think, we have been concerned about the progress. That was 2021, we're now in 2023. And whilst we agreed an approach that should look at external assurances, I just feel that the report as it stands, and I don't want to be too negative about the report because, I appreciate the work that's gone into it, is too much focused on that and not enough on giving us assurance over the expenditure. So, for instance, there's a lot on the audited grant claims by the council. That's largely for the benefit of the person granting the grant as opposed to the council itself. And whilst I can see, when the grants relate to property acquisitions, you can see a clear trail and that they want proof of the purchase. So that probably does, and I note that, you've put those as assurance over the whole amount. So on capital expenditure, it does give us a certain amount of assurance. But other than property acquisitions, I think there's too much focus on grants, which, as I said, is for the benefit of other parties and not ourselves. And, the task force reports, they cover more on delivery than on expenditure and record keeping. And similarly, whilst the Grenfell Recovery Programme second report was helpful in setting out what was delivered as part of the recovery programme, nowhere are the costs mentioned is that tied into the costs, which is something that we're interested in. And the other thing is the report in section 8 places a lot of reliance on the audit of the accounts. And I suppose my concern about that is that's done to a completely different level of materiality. I think the materiality is 11.3 million, which I think if we were to set materiality for that, this on the same basis, it would be about half of that. And also there's no, we don't get, you've identified potential for testing. And I think going forward, we'd like to see this be quite a priority. We'd like to get it concluded by September. And I think that conclusion, and I've spoken to Andrew Ling about this, we've been in contact, should be a table of expenditures that is more granular than what is in Appendix 1, and which we can say is materially correct, both in the amount and description of the adjustments agreed and included, and that there should be a sample testing of expenditures, looking at the evidence and the operation of key controls. And I think there's a lot of merit in keeping the exercise simple and focusing on a crisp conclusion. But I just don't think, as we are, we have that conclusion. And I think we should just put aside to one side, unless it's a property, the work on grants and the work on other people's assurance, which is provide them with comfort. I think we now need arrow. Is that okay?
That's really, really helpful. This, I think, from my point of view, from with the team, we can resource that piece of work to do that testing, sample testing. And I think we have the information. So if you remember, I think you saw this amongst others. Taryn provided the detailed breakdown that supported that summary table. I think Councillor Lindsay saw it on behalf of the committee. I think it was Witt as well. So we can use that granular level to demonstrate to you the testing we've done in those areas.
What portion has been tested and confirmed?
Yes.
We've got confirmation over the capital expenditure, and that seems to have been covered off. But it's all that revenue expenditure, particularly in the later years, that's all in the pink, and it's external audit, and I don't think that is insurance.
About sampling, how much sampling do you think would give you reassurance? Just conscious of work.
So I think we talked. It might be helpful to have a conversation with yourself and Andrew about the kind of volume of transactions in those areas, and then the appropriate.
So could I also ask, obviously we've done some internal audits in some of those areas, we looked at controls and we were, are you okay if we don't include those ones?
Well, we can say what the control work.
What controls were tested over the expenditure would be quite helpful. Yeah.
No,
that's okay. Yeah.
I think I would just stress, David, without wishing to say we should brush this at all, this has now been some time, and I'm conscious as much for the amount of time your officers are spending on it, that really we need to be in a position in September to actually say this is the final report, and hopefully we accept it as the reassurance we need. I'll come to Maxine.
Could I just ask the question as to kind of what the underlying or what the kind of big question is you're wanting to ask here. So obviously I'm coming through to this part way along, but I'm just trying to understand kind of what given that the majority of the information that the committee's been given about different audits, about Grant Thornton, about KPMG, about the reporting that's gone into the public domain about the expenditure, but I'm obviously sensing that is not seen as giving sufficient assurance. And why is that? What's driving this?
I think the thing is, all this assurance is coming at us from various directions and it hasn't really been pulled together. And I think what we need to know is that the expenditure report, that the paper that Taryn has, which has a detailed analysis, is reasonably accurate, and monies have been spent on the items described, and that the services reported had actually been delivered. And it's probably not clear how verifiable that would necessarily be.
So are there any particular services that you think have been reported but not delivered?
We don't know.
I think it's more about getting that
You just need to get assurance
Yeah,
that
okay.
it has actually happened. And I think we did initially want an opinion that overall value for money had been achieved, but I think that might be going a step too far now.
Almost matching you asking what is the exam question, isn't it? What is
Yeah.
the
Does that answer?
Maxine asked the
So
question.
I think it does. So I mean, so if we're taking, for example, the payments that were made to people in hotels who were displaced by the fire, and so the evidence. So I mean, obviously there are service records that those payments were made. There's financial information that money went out from our accounts.
Yeah.
So would that, for example, the fact that those exist would be sufficient, or are you're asking to something further than that?
I mean, presumably those payments were made for a specific purpose.
Well, these were emergency. This is emergency. I was just picking that as an example, but that would be emergency response within the first few months when people are living in hotels, and so those payments were made. For a particular purpose. Obviously, there was controls around those and how they were made. So, the £50 million recovery programme has got reports to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that reports in a pretty detailed way. And the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in their last report got financial information about that as well. So I take your point absolutely, Liz, about the impact report needing to be tied to expenditure, and that I think was then taken forward in the latest report that went to Overview and Scrutiny. So that's for the recovery programme. Through Grenfell Recovery Framework, there's now the next 4-year framework has been to the leadership team recently. And then there's obviously the backcasting on the money that was spent on the recovery, which was, and I've seen, which would transition from London Gold to the council, and then had all these complex elements that go with international disaster recovery. And so it is a complex one for the committee to consider. I completely agree. Just thinking about the best way. I wonder if perhaps an overview report about this chunk of money, these were the, this is the evidence that it happened.
Yeah.
So if the concern here is that, I don't know, some money's gone missing, or that something was paid for but not done, is that the concern?
We don't know.
No,
I've got no assurance over this.
I can't speak because I wasn't when it was set up, but
Yeah.
that's not my sense where it's coming from.
Okay.
It's just coming from the other side, that was the money spent, and can we trace that money?
I think part of the
Okay,
yeah.
committee's not concern is the right word, but the limitation of the external audit work was the materiality thresholds that they mentioned. So actually, testing a bit at a high level.
Yeah.
So understanding at a bit lower level and doing some testing at a lower level gives that
Right.
further assurance rather than it being a concern that
That's really
something wasn't
helpful.
there.
That's fine. Yeah.
Councillor Denko, do you want to
Yes,
ask
thank
a
you.
question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that Councillor Simmons isn't here tonight. She, before she was appointed, that she's one of the Nottingham councillors, and she's dealing with this daily. So your question about whether the effectiveness and so on, she would know. She knows far more than anybody else about what's happened on the ground. But I just wanted to make a couple of points on it, and I've got 3 specific questions. I first brought this up. I'm sure David will remember. In 2019, when we had the statement of accounts, I thought, where is all the ground floor money? Where is it? And it's sort of evolved from there into this. That's been 4 years. A lot of people feel if we had the ground floor recovery scrutiny committee, this would have been done along the way rather than having to be all pulled together now. So that's just an issue that I just like to make that point. So I've got 3 specific questions. Firstly, are we now done, or are we going to update to 2023? Because that would be helpful. And I'm just thinking about the questions that we have from the community, because this really has come originally from people in the community saying, where's the money gone, where's the money gone, where's the money gone? People are earning ridiculous amounts of money. Some of it grossly unfair, and some of it may be fair, I don't know. And all I wanted was a report that was, good or bad, but it was all true. And I could say, this is true, this is where the money has gone. Most of it has been fantastic, and the couple of projects maybe weren't all they should have been, but there we are. So are we going to have an update, or are we done? That's one thing, one question. I think if we're going to go have a bit more granular information in there, certainly one that the people in the community are asking is particularly corporate costs. So that is staffing, publicity, outreach, engagement, and all of those things. So I think that would be corporate cost breakdown would be really, really helpful. And finally, which Liz just brought up, it's the whole issue about the value for money, which maybe that is for the OSD or for the various scrutiny committees. But I just think we're missing out on that because now we know how much has been spent, and obviously there's a great deal of frustration out there still about what has and hasn't worked. So that's probably not for this committee, but I just think we should note that work has not been done. Has this money been well spent? And somewhere that should be noted, I think. So those are my 3 questions, and I think Claire sent some questions, but she may discuss with you anyway, David. She had quite a number of questions herself.
I've not seen them, but I'm happy to pick up those.
Yeah.
So I've not seen yet.
So just three very quick points. So 2023, corporate costs and value.
As Maxine mentioned, in terms of the impact and reach assessment work reporting is going to over scrutiny, there has been work done to build in the budget provisions there. I think there's further work we can do with officers to help to make that as complete a picture as we can for over scrutiny. So I think that's really the right place to be doing that. I think that's a very valid point. I think we will bring it, this is an update report for the 4 years, and we will bring a final report for the 4 years, which is what we're committed to do. I think that's appropriate. The granular information is exactly what the detailed spreadsheet we were talking about earlier contained, so you'll get to see each of those headings within that granular spreadsheet, and then the assurance we can give on the testing within each of those areas. So that will be covered.
The value for money, I don't know if that's our job or somebody else's, but that work needs to be done somewhere.
I think that perhaps it is more of a question for overview screening potentially. That's sort of discussion perhaps to be had.
I guess if they do it and we are not content with it, then the groundwork on it is overview scrutiny. We need to be happy that what was done is sufficient and okay.
And so some grants and so on are winding down. And we need to know have they worked. So I'm just thinking about the mental health and wellbeing, just as one example. But some of the other projects are actually winding down. And people say, well, what's going to happen now? So that's.
But that's a slightly different thing, Emma, as to value for money, what has been spent versus what's going to happen in the future.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that if people, whatever the project was set up, if they haven't achieved that, so they're saying, oh, actually we need more, then that is relevant to this committee. You're right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, anything further you'd like to add? Okay, nothing for me.
Just to note that to the July leadership, there's a paper, so 12th of July leadership,
Okay, thank you. David, are you happy now? You've got a clear.
Yes, we'll continue to have conversations with Andrew in particular. Yeah.
And if I say, if this is not going to happen by September, I know you should let us know, and then we can see how we can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we then now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the local code of corporate governance?
So the word is on leave, so it's down to me to bring again. So this came to the committee at the last meeting. You provided some very helpful feedback, particularly on Appendix 1. So I want to draw to your attention that a number of changes were made, particularly Section 2 in Appendix 1, which I think Councillor Gardner in particular have made some very helpful comments. So the intention is to bring it back here to see if you're content with the changes that are made. It will then go on to full council if that's the case, and then we'll keep it under review as we go along. So just a reminder, this is a document that sets out the national framework, but we've tried to tailor it more to ensure you're clear about what is being done rather than what should be being done at RBKC, and that we've tailored that section too in the appendix to try and help with some of that agreements.
Councillor Gordon, as you raised point of view, do you want to?
I didn't look at the non-marked up, I'm just checking. There was
Yes,
nothing
you got the
marked up that came through today. No, I don't think I had anything in this.
Just one quick question. Page 79, 4.5, you had 6th of March 2023, that's been removed. Just need to get as Maxine mentioned, we need to get specific dates and times of when things are going to happen.
Yes.
Is there going to be a specific date put in there?
So, right, yes, we can make sure that does. So, it's 4.5, is that? 75. That will be today. If you're content, that will be today.
Why are the NOLA principles not spelled out in this code of corporate governance?
That's a very good question. We'll go back and check the Civil Solids Code. I think it does refer to the principles.
Yeah.
I think, are they not,
They're referred to,
they're
but
not
not
section
mentioned.
3? I thought I had that was. So, I thought they were named
They're not there.
as a name.
They're mentioned.
Yeah,
but not-
these
they're
are,
not
so
spelled.
3.4 contains the 12 principles proposed by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny,
So where's this, sorry?
on page 77.
I think
If that's,
I
those
thought
aren't the NOLA
I thought
principles.
6.1 on page 75, I thought those were the known principles, but I read them.
Which one?
Maybe not.
No, they're not.
No,
They're
they're
not.
not. They're
No.
not. NOLA principles aren't mentioned.
So, yeah. So you'd like some, there is reference to known principles in
But
here,
they're
not
not
what they
mentioned.
are.
But
So we can incorporate those.
So incorporate them and put them as an annex or something,
Yeah.
but maybe it's easier to put them as an annex.
That's fine, yeah.
rather than into agreement.
It's because, I mean, I sit on the UK endorsement board, and we have our own principles and statute, but we also refer to NOLA principles. And then on Appendix A, I know we say behaviours and actions to be taken by the council, but in the most case, it's ensure people behave with integrity. And then in a few cases, we put will be reviewed, will be. But the majority is not future case.
Okay.
And then page 85, we refer to the audit committee, it's the audit transparency.
Yeah, we have corrections.
Okay, so with those 2 or 3 amendments, with the addition of the known principles as an annex or whatever, are we happy that this doesn't need to come back and we are signing it off as that, please?
Agree.
Agree? Agree? Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move now to the next item on our agenda, is the original audit report. Yes, Moira, this is your.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, this is the annual report of the Head of Internal Audit, which summarises our opinion on the Council's arrangements for internal control, governance and risk management. We're expected to provide this opinion. I've had a conversation about what is it for you to do here. So what we're doing is we're summarising what we've looked at during the year in our audit work, which would be the audit, the follow-up work we've done, progress with implementing recommendations, which is rightly pointed out very important. We've also flagged up other areas of assurance that we have had involvement in, maybe conversations or been provided. So we get a whole picture, which helps us to form this opinion, and it also feeds into the annual governance statement, which is supporting the annual accounts, which you'll see, I think, in July. Hopefully. But as I say, we also look at governance and risk management, because obviously this committee sees those things as well. We wanted to summarise our opinion on that. So hopefully the progress reports that I've been bringing to you regularly start to build a picture for you from the audit point of view, and I've summarised all the work that we've done in Appendix 1, and you will see from that there was a massive number of what we call limited assurance reviews. There'll always be some. Sometimes they're more significant areas, sometimes they're areas which are relatively small in the context of council. We report them in the same way to you, but we contextualise them for them. There's also a small amount of work which is in progress, but they're not covered in this report, in my opinion, because we haven't finished enough work to make that judgment. But we flag them up for you so you know that they're coming and you will get them, and they'll be finished next year. And we've also included in here details of any audit work which we haven't completed and the reasons why, and hopefully those reasons are acceptable to you. So I wasn't really going to say any more to this. The only other point I would flag up is that obviously we met in March and a bit of work was finished in the last part of the year. So it's usually quite a lot actually gets finished in the last couple of months of the year. And I've attached those details in the appendix, so it's like your normal progress report.
Yes.
Just so that you get the detail of the areas that it covers, and you don't miss out on any of that information. And we follow up. So it's really for you to review and consider whether or not this is covering what we said it would cover, whether you feel that our opinion is built up in that way that I've suggested. And obviously, if there's any areas in the report or any of the work that we've done that you'd like to ask us a bit more about, or even flag up you would like more work done in that area, then that's something that you can consider.
Okay, before we come to any specific, just a question I had reading this is there a benchmark? In terms of other local authorities, are all the 80%, whatever, is that good, or is every other local authority getting 90%? Is there any, does anybody produce a set of?
There is some benchmarking done from time to time. It's not been done on annual opinions recently. So I think one of the things I would say is that this is a risk-based audit plan. So you'd expect to see some limited assurance for review. So something in the order of sort of 80% or above is quite good, because we're looking for, and actually sometimes managers are asking for areas they know that are of risk already. And I think, looking across the three authorities I'm responsible for, 80% or thereabouts is reasonable, and it's been consistent across a few years. And I think it's something we can do some more work on for you in terms of.
Just when you read it, perhaps that's good, but
If I might just come in now, I read that I thought it was rather high actually, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, it's good. I mean, it's probably about right, and I think the fact that the services operate across 3 boroughs does give us actually a really useful level of benchmarking that can be hard to get from organisations if you just ask them. But I'm used to seeing, it may be that I was working in a much less a less well managed environment, but I'm certainly used to seeing more limited, hardly any substantial assurance, a fair range of satisfactory, but more limited, and some no assurance. Now that might be where I was working before. We did an awful lot of audits of small tenant management organisations, which we don't have here.
Experience of that elsewhere as well.
But so that was probably the bulk of the kind of limited and no assurance. But I do think it's worth just asking ourselves the question, like, is this rigorous enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more, just on the appendix 1, just help me, maybe you've done it before, on the assurance levels. So, for example, I look at the very first one, which is satisfactory. It's got 0, 0, 0. I then look 2/3 of the way down the council tax one, where it's substantial with 0, 0, 0. So what's the word? How do you?
Yes.
So, the finance, HR and payroll compliance is some sort of ongoing work that we do to reassure ourselves that the very high trust model system that we have in place through Hampshire is being complied with. There are no generic recommendations that we've made from that work, but what it does is it informs us of areas where we might want to do more work. And for example, talk the director of HR if we felt that there was some scope for, say word abuse, but not following due process in a particular area.
I guess one of my questions was more not on the specific of that.
Yeah,
It's what's the definition of each of those assurance levels?
It depends on the system as well that we're looking at. It's I can't know if I can put it into very good words, but I think I put a definition in a previous report.
We have had it.
I think it was the last progress report, or maybe it was in November. Sorry, I didn't put it in here because I tried.
But then that's okay. But the question I'm asking, I guess, and maybe there isn't a scientific answer to it, is if you get 2 levels, a satisfactory and a substantial,
But the same number of
the same, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a school, for example, will get far more recommendations and still be satisfactory than, for example, it's a bit of a random one, let's put a random one. Utilities and energy management, which is a really important thing that you need to manage. So if you could have 2 or 3 of the higher level recommendations at a school, and it wouldn't be limited. That was in another complex area, which was more cross council, then that probably would.
I think on the second one, actually, Chair, as well, it's actually to do with grants. So it's a pass-fail. So satisfactory is what it is. It's passed. So I think we're going to be clear in terms of, I suppose, just thinking about how we just describe some of the audit areas we cover. Typically, we can look at an area of risk and the risk we consider it to be, and the number of recommendations we're making, and the priority recommendation we're making. So it's not a scientific, if it's that, it must be that. There's a judgment there as well.
Yeah, you can read a piece of work and you can think, that's not good. And another place you can say that's not limited. There's a few things, but it's not limited.
I guess it was okay. I'll finish now. It wasn't so much the definition of each thing; it was how you get that variance. Councillor Gardner, you wanted to.
I actually wanted to follow up on. I think you've answered the question about is 81% acceptable, but actually, if you use paragraph 1.4, it's actually the number of recommendations would have been partly or fully implemented, and actually, should we be more concerned there that only 75% have been fully implemented and 23% partly? And the, what would you expect? And frankly, is this below par?
With a lot of those recommendations, I meant to mention it before, I'm not sure if you were considering, but some of them can't necessarily be done overnight. They're not easy fixes, and the easy fixes are always done, and usually the low priority recommendations. But what I'm trying to get is people to be more realistic about when I say make a recommendation, we're trying to build this into the emails that we send out, is please ensure that the timescales for implementing the recommendation are reasonable and achievable, and that the person responsible for them has agreed them, because sometimes there's a number of people who have to be involved in that discussion. So the ones that are partially implemented, I would suggest in those cases, there's a very good reason for it. They probably weren't. They were ambitious when they said that they didn't come through. They haven't yet, but they are on the way. Sometimes it's literally out of their control. There's something that's happened, a piece of legislation or something they're waiting for before they make a specific change, and they can't do it. So I believe that that's good, because they are trying to do something. There's always active. I can see action. That's the most important thing to me.
So there are being a bit too soft touch sometimes.
No, I don't think so. I mean, what we've said before is that if I felt that somebody wasn't taking us seriously, we would suggest to you that you invite them here to talk about why they're not progressing recommendations that we've made. So I know, and we do tell them that that is a possibility. We always talk
But
about.
when did that last happen?
It's happened, but I'm trying to think. It was probably.
And Max is reminded the executive director to the last risk and control board as well. That would be the case.
Yeah, I suspect
Making
it's.
sure that recommendations are being implemented.
In Appendix 3, recommendations not implemented, which is on the same point. There are two. There's one that was due in November 2021, and it's now the revised implementation date of April 2023. And there's another one that was due December, on page 115, due December 2021, which is now March 2023.
Mhm.
And there's no explanation given as to why that's been delayed.
There are reasons, there are different reasons. Was it the first one you mentioned?
First one's the very first.
Yeah, so that was delayed because of a new system, and they were going to wait. They wanted to get the system in before they changed the process. It wasn't. It was being monitored, but it wasn't the recommendation they'd agreed to. But they were still working on getting that in place.
I think if we've got things like that, can you put it in
Yes,
the table?
I'm
It's quite important.
hoping in September I can give you a better explanations, because some of these have actually been superseded as well. But I'm talking to the staff who are doing the follow-ups, they know that things have changed, and I can give you better detail then. I just didn't really have the opportunity to do that.
We can make sure in the future that's.
Yeah, I'm very mindful, and the staff are very mindful about the importance of the implementation.
Just looking at this, September 2023 is going to be a hell of a busy month.
Yes,
There
so
is-
As part of
Yeah.
the audit report, so it will be,
Got
it won't be a
credit
separate
for-
report.
we've got
It'll be in the progress report.
Yes.
So when I meant that, all the
Yeah, they're
Yes,
all
well,
working on
well,
it at the
well,
moment. So, yeah. I've been meeting with the staff for the last couple of weeks, and they're all trying to get these resolved.
good.
So not to campaign, but on page 112, in the bottom paragraph 2.5, the second sentence is sometimes recommendations cannot be fully implemented in the anticipated timescales. What I'd like to understand here is when you're doing your internal audits, are you looking at where you think there's a problem and you're setting a timetable for a piece of work to get completed, which would be the normal work of internal audit, or are you asking the executive director in that department when they're going to complete that work? The reason I ask that is because if you look at some of the more urgent pieces of work that need to be done in Appendix 1, for example, you mentioned housing and social investment on page 104, or resources, for example, recruitment, where it's a high priority recommendation. Let's say there's no power to a block where people live. That would be a very, very important piece of work that would need to be done. And are you saying that you leave it to the executive director to tell you when they're going to get it done? Because if that were the case, then where you're leaving what I would call a date to be given to you, which can necessarily lead to slippage, it means that in relation to internal audit, you're not holding these people to account, because our residents are asking us that if there's a problem, and you've identified there's a problem, we get told as councillors there's a problem here, why isn't it being resolved? And if I go back to them and say, well, internal audit's identified it, they've asked the executive director said, well, I'll do it by November 2021, but actually there's a problem, I'll do it by March 2022. Well, actually there's a problem, I'll do it by September 25. Our residents are extremely concerned, and I note that you put in here sometimes recommendations are not met, and that caused me some extreme concern.
So-
oh, sorry, guys. So
No, I was going to say that when we're talking about the recommendation, there's normally an agreed thing that they're going to do, but they more often than not, if for example they have to procure a new system or they have to implement a new upgrade to something, and that's delayed for that reason, they would put in something else that would help us
Even a short-term fix.
partially implement it. But it's not ideal because there's probably extra human input required. It's probably spreadsheets, they're not ideal. The ultimate aim is you get a new system or upgrade, whatever it is. It will get there, but it's going to take time. That's fine, and we're still looking for them to get to that end of the road. But they would, when we do the follow-up, we say, well, what are you doing to manage that? And 9 times out of 10 there is a process, albeit not ideal, but there's something in place, they're aware of it. Most of the departments we work with track their recommendations as well, because they get recommendations from all over the place. They get them from external audit, internal audit, various regulators, inspections and stuff like that. So they do tend to track it anyway. And then as a management team, they are asking what's happening, what do we do with this? And if you take one of the examples, it's an external factor, the access for Zurich to have access to a particular system. That's not really within our control. We're still trying to get there, but we have a solution, but it's not the best solution.
So just for the follow-up on that, two points. You said that sometimes some departments follow up on recommendations. I'd be concerned that that's not all departments follow up on recommendations.
Some of them have formal tracking.
Yeah, so my point, Maxine, it's great you're here. For example, all departments should have formal tracking on every recommendation, because otherwise what are they doing? And then the second point is that if I ask an executive director to give me when a major recommendation has to be implemented, because that executive director runs that department and knows about the externalities and how long things take, I would expect the executive director to say as follows: we've got a piece of work and some known unknowns that will take us to March 2024, so we're going to build an interim solution that will be done within the next 3 months, because the final solution will take longer. But I'd expect them to tell you that so that you can put the recommendations. For them to say there are too many external factors we don't know, simply can't happen, because residents are saying you've got to know what you're doing because you're an executive director of a government.
So maybe I'm not being clear enough here, but when we come to do the follow-up, we go through what have they done, what have they achieved. And sometimes things do go wrong and they cannot do what they thought they could do within that timescale. And they will say, but we've done this and we're doing this and we're still working towards that. But the system isn't available, it's whatever. But we are managing it, and we will still go back to see no progress in it. So we don't just say, yes, we accept what you're saying, we ask them to show us what they're doing. We do that.
Maxine.
So the expectation that you're saying, Councillor, actually is one that I would share. So the risk, through risk and control boards, there is, and we've had, I've chaired about 3 or 4 of those. There is that expectation of these are your audits. My particular focus, I guess, has been where there is limited assurance or anything below, so basically anything below satisfactory. What's happening with those? What are you doing about those? So all of the executive directors have assured me that their departmental management teams have track the implementation of the audit recommendations. I think the high priority ones are the ones where the committee, is probably best to focus, because a medium priority, like the one that we were just discussing, that is kind of it's kind of irritating that it hasn't happened. I don't think the original audit said that it was part of the kind of critical path to full assurance on this one. But I'm looking at Lancaster West Refurbishment Programme, which is obviously a high priority programme, and it says that there is still an outstanding high priority action. But when I read the narrative, it sounds more like it's been implemented, but that, so there's that clarity. I'd be happy to say to executive directors, if you have, high priority recommendations that haven't been closed off, then the audit committee would like to come and report on that. You could have a kind of mini deep dive on an audit if there's high priority. I mean, you probably want to take a judgment about when you want to do that, but sometimes it will give you cause for concern. Because certainly outstanding actions, I think, is a red flag, cause for concern on audits. If you have an audit, people will take it really seriously, get on and implement the recommendations, that's a good thing. Where they're outstanding is more of a concern that is drifting around.
I think you've been residential twice now. We've talked about getting executive directors here occasionally. It's not going to be it, and I think maybe that's something we can just get a bit more focused on. Councillor Gardner.
Can I just ask about the business improvement districts? I think this is shocking report, really unimpressive. And I know recommendations are expected to be implemented by July. Could this come back to the next audit commission on the 17th of July?
So, do you want to follow up with the recommendations to come back, or do you want to speak to the people responsible for the area where we're giving them assurances?
Can I make a suggestion? So this is a very live issue at the moment, because my understanding is we've got the bills out for 23-24 to all the businesses involved in bids, but there's now the question of collection of the previous bills. So Mike Curtis has just given a pretty detailed response to the leader and to Councillor Thamasites as the lead member. Mike comes anyway, generally speaking, doesn't he? He's not here tonight, but so I think I think he's the appropriate exec director to respond on this and do so as part of the business next time.
And I just find it extraordinary that this is so business interactive and it's just gone so wrong.
Why don't rather than wait for the next committee, why don't we just get that sent to you as committee members, and you can take a look at it.
And maybe by the July meeting, just as a sort of any of the business item rather than a full agenda item, you could just get a click on that. Just a quickie on schools, on the changes to the 2022-23, there's several schools that are grouped together as requests to defer. What's going on with
So some
schools?
it varies. Some of the schools, the changes at sort of leadership team or the business manager, office staff. We had a huge number of schools to do last year, to be frank, and they were not ones that necessarily caused us any concern, but deferring to individually. And I spoke to the heads and the councils about what we did with these deferment. It wasn't considered a massive issue.
Okay, so we are on that, asked to consider whether there are any aspects of the report that we would like to explore in more detail. I think you've spoken on some of those. I think there's a slight message coming out, isn't there? We need a bit more rigour to help us with our assurance, with actually me feeling confident. And you may have that rigour, you may be doing it, but it's not always coming through to us.
Yeah.
Liz, any final comments?
No.
You're quite good on these things. Anything?
No, that's it. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the audit work in progress, from page 105, 6 and 7, I think it's up on. Quite a lot of work in there. You have the resources to complete the work that you've got planned and follow up on all the things that haven't been done elsewhere.
So I actually thought it was quite a nice small list of work in progress. Some of it didn't start till quite late, it starts rolled into the next year. And a number of them say the reports are due. We need to have conversation. Once we've got to a point where we've got a report, we need to talk to departments about it, because there's obviously stuff in there, we just want to make sure it's actually accurate. And we need to have those meetings, and that's just just because everyone's very busy this time of year. So I'm very confident that they will come through pretty soon. I would suspect it probably be reporting in September, is I think the next one. Yeah. Some of the stuff that wasn't done isn't being carried into next year. It might be carried into a future year. It's we re-evaluate. It's the most important pieces of work that we need to do. So I'm happy with that. Resources wise, we're actually increasing the team size. So we're actively recruiting into the internal audit team. So looking to build from bottom and train.
So as many authorities in London are doing now, the London internal audit generally has had quite heavy reliance on external firms providing internal audit work and contracts. And obviously their costs are escalating, they're finding it difficult to recruit staff as well. So what we're doing is growing our own team more, so we can have that direct control of the resource to actually deliver audit work.
So just a final question then. You say that you may not take in to the audit plan what you've done so far that's outstanding. Presumably anything that's high priority will be taken. Is that correct?
Yeah, obviously looking at the big picture. Anything that's work in progress is work in progress. That will happen. Anything that was deferred from last year, it really depends on what it was. It may be, it evolves into something else, but we have those conversations every quarter with the exec directors anyway, to prioritise.
Can you assure us though, that for example, if you've deemed it a high priority, it's going to get followed up on?
Yeah.
Because that would be bizarre.
Yes, yes, it would.
Could I just ask, on page 106, home care, delayed start to deferred to. My concern is who's delaying and why?
It was a combination of events. We started the sort of scoping of it. They were in the middle of some work on the home care front, and then my auditor, who was actually going to be working on that, was actually doing exams, so the timing was just really bad, and I couldn't. I wanted to finish other work rather than start something and have to put it down again. So I made a decision, let's stop it, we'll do it this year. It's restarted.
So it's quarter one?
Well, and it's going back to start again to the scoping quarter one, yes. So we're at the end of quarter one now.
Yeah.
The idea is it will be undertaken early
Quarter
quarter
four.
one.
I mean,
I'm hoping not. If they tell me something that's significant, like all our resources are involved in this, and this, so they would struggle to engage with you, then David and I will discuss whether or not it's acceptable. It would depend.
The intention is to progress that.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to item number 9, please, now, which is the anti-fraud annual report? Andrew, are you going to lead on that?
Thank you. The report, I've kept it in, it's pretty much in its normal format, but I suppose sort of in keeping with tonight's theme on the committee, there's a new section that I've brought in to really talk about the emerging risks and trends in terms of fraud risks. And there's an extra section in page 121. And I think we're quite lucky in respect of having a shared service, because sometimes I see cases come across my desk and I just think, are we unlucky? But then being able to look at what's happening in other local authorities firsthand, you start to build up a picture quite quickly of where trends lie. So I felt it important to tease those out to present them to the committee. I'm going to take the report as read and be ready to answer any questions anyone may have.
Okay, just while this is looking over, can I just ask, some of them, and we can't go through every one of them, but some of them have got on page 120, the table there.
Yeah.
You take actually the first one, housing application fraud. 2021 was 48, 21-22 was 50, down to 4. Now, you can expect some fluctuation year to year, but and there's one or two others where that fluctuation is quite significant.
Yeah, I've probably not teased it out, and really I probably should have put a footnote to explain that. If you look at the 2 previous years, they were around about the time of the pandemic, where a lot of the issues that we had in terms of tenancy fraud, we couldn't knock on doors, we couldn't get out there and check the residency. So we did a lot of data matching, and we did a lot of desk-based inquiries looking at the waiting list to see if we could reduce some of the individuals on there. So, for example, the data matching, we did a lot more looking at the NFI data to identify whether individuals had now been placed elsewhere in London or in another local authority, and that match enabled us to give that information to our housing colleagues to then remove the individuals from the waiting list. So there was a lot more work on that, and it was potentially, I suppose, what we may have done is cut the grass quite low now. So we've cleared out some of the low hanging fruit, and where we are now is really a much more robust and a lot more correct waiting list than where it should be.
Detections, are we getting better at the detection subtotal? It's been climbing over the years. Are we getting better at it, or are people being naughty?
I think one of the things that we've done here, and again, sort of linking in nicely to the emerging risks and trends, it's something that's been going on for a number of years, and that's tenancy fraud, and I've highlighted it again. And the reason I've teased it out again is because some of the factors are not changing. So we've got a cost of living crisis going on, so therefore individuals may take greater risks, they may take opportunities to earn income from their properties. We've had a massive build-up over the last number of years. We've only got to look at the television in terms of adverts in places like companies like Airbnb. That's increasing people to make fast, quick money out of renting these properties, and that means that these properties are taken out of circulation, albeit for the private sector, but it means that those tenancies aren't available anymore. So I think what we've had is an increase, which we've identified. We've also had the authority say, right, okay, that's a problem, we've put additional resource into it. So we've got additional resource with some officers who sit within the housing management structure. And if you look at the increase in the number of recoveries, 35 is probably a bigger figure than we had pre-pandemic. It's a really good return in terms of the resource that the council's willing to put in to really tackling this issue.
Thank you. Liz, do you want to
No, I think I'm okay, actually.
so a lot of shuffling of papers?
I know. There's a cross-reference that's been out, but I can't find it now, so we'll leave it. Sorry.
You let us know. Take me off. Let's just check it for you.
Go on.
I had one question on paragraph 4.8. You talk about a solicitor who's working for 2 different public sector organisations. What was the outcome?
They had already resigned. They came in and offered their resignation. Now, it didn't cross my desk at the time. It was one that was picked up because from speaking to the Burn, funnily enough, we had the conversation. It was raised with me because obviously it was a fraud risk which we needed to make a note of. The individual worked for another public sector organisation, and again, this is one of the issues of hybrid working, where, for example, officers may not physically see each other because of the days that they come into the office. And actually what happened was an individual recognised that person because they had also come from the same public sector body. The individual realised that they possibly had been spotted and made it known to their line manager, I'm doing some work as well for another public sector body. And then they resigned thereafter. Now, there wasn't action taken in this individual in this instance, but it's the problem we're having across probably the UK, that some local authorities are looking to bring on locums to do work outside the normal 9 to 5 to clear some of their backlog work. So you will get more and more examples where individuals lawfully are doing two jobs for two different public sector bodies. In this instance, we didn't take action because they'd already resigned, they'd only been with us for a very short period of time, and it wasn't really cost effective to move that forward. But given the fact that some local authorities, not in London, but outside London, were asking for locums to work additional work, put in additional hours working for them, it's a hard one to look at when you try to take action against someone in terms of knowledge, because they may feel it's okay to do because it's happening over there or it's happening over there. But we are working going forward to make sure that we do try to stop this. We're doing a big data matching exercise, working with a lot of these people come in via agencies, so therefore our own due diligence is sort of a little bit diluted, and that's why they're not being picked up. So we're trying to do some work at the moment with all the big agencies across London. Problem being is that the big agencies in many instances are a conduit for a number of smaller agencies. So we're trying to get them on board to get not just their data for their direct agency employees, but also the agencies below them and their data to try and match against payroll across London so that we can hopefully identify these individuals. Where we do see that there are issues, we do try to take action. The individual that's also referred to, there's another case here that's referred to about the Housing Association. Unfortunately, the Housing Association did not want to act. They didn't support us on this, and it would have been really important. We needed their HR department really to give witness statements for us to consider taking action, because that individual really was false accounting or theft of time because they were doing two jobs, albeit they were off sick from RBKC, but that's still an income when they're working over there. So we do, it sounds horrible, it is a risk that's growing. Unfortunately, the normalisation of working from home and hybrid working is increasing those risks. So we are trying to address it, but if we do find a serious case, we are going to be taking action.
Somebody like a solicitor, there's a professional body behind that. So in fact, they could lose their fraction certificate if it was outside. So I'm just intrigued as to whether you followed up with a professional organisation to understand if it across the boundaries, because potentially that's fraud, and therefore that actually disqualifies you from being a practicing assistant. So I'm not looking to throw the book at somebody, but I do wonder to what extent you look to a professional organisation for advice as to whether there should be some form of sanction. Yeah.
I'm sure Laverne would have considered that action, so I will go back to her and I will get clarity, because I suppose by the time it came to me, it was the case complete. So I will find out and make sure that that action was taken in that respect. Absolutely.
We do look at other forms of sanction like that.
And just following up on that, as this is, as you say, a growing issue, what support, what training are we giving to our line managers? Because there is there's a management issue here as well as a contractual issue, isn't there?
There is, and it's something we're trying to get, working with HR at the moment. What we're going to try and do is put some stuff in the management briefly, just to remind them that obviously there is a responsibility on managers to make sure that their officers are working. We don't want managers ending up doing micromanagement. We're trying to avoid that, but we just want to make sure that they are aware of the risks from hybrid working and working from home, so that they fully understand it. We've got to be very careful, because I don't want to end up with a load of micromanagers working.
No, but there is an element of performance management here, isn't there? If a manager notices, nothing else.
Thank you. On page 124, bit 6.8, it notes that the report comes to the Audit and Transparency Committee twice a year. How often do you report it internally to the executive management team, Maxine's team, and elsewhere within the leadership team of the council?
So yeah, it effectively goes through the structure of it being on.
So the information is shared. I think we'll make sure someone's in control of which is going forward as well.
So my follow-up question then is, if there's something that's prevalent, housing fraud, if there are some huge problems that happen in a month, do you leave that for the next 6 months cycle.
So there are regular meetings with colleagues in housing on flood matters. So we're making sure that we're working together.
So when you say regular, you mean what, once a month?
I think I meet with Doug, Golding, director, every 6 weeks, and he meets with colleagues and flood.
Yeah, I mean, my peer as well, sort of on a monthly basis, that's what we make to ensure that that moves forward. Because because of the close working, because we have our housing investigation team in housing management, we always work closely to make sure we're available to support them. So if, for example, they have an issue with resources, then we're there to support and follow up to make sure they're supported in those cases. If there's a bigger issue in terms of a specific risk, that would go through David to alert Doug so that that is brought to the director's attention.
So there's no specific, I mean, twice a year that you come to us, it sounds as if it's 6 weekly you're meeting housing, is that right? Have I got that right?
Depending on what level, monthly or 6 weeks.
Yeah. Director level is probably 6 weekly, but in terms of officer level, that's monthly.
Understand. If that can just be put into the report, so it's transparent, so people know that it isn't just once every 6 months. And then,
Absolutely.
And then in relation to the executive management team, the top level, that comes in every 6 months. Is that right? Have I got that wrong?
Yeah,
That's how we do it. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I probably put that in here as a where we are in terms of working with committee members rather than exec team. So that's, I quite understand, that's not been teased out, has it? Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendation there is to note the outcomes along with the emerging risks, consider whether any areas the committee would like to explore further. Done that, so are we happy to move on now from that to the next item on the agenda, which is A10. Dave.
Something to remove.
Yeah.
Can I just offer some to remove?
Dave, you want to lead us on this, and then we'll take it on with members.
Apologies. So yes, so obviously this is a bringing meeting with Callum's help. So we look at the actions from previous meetings to make sure we can demonstrate to you that we have taken steps where appropriate to provide further information or to take further reports to the committee. Obviously what we do is we keep the live actions at the front and the recently closed items at the end. The committee to review and suggest if there are any items for closure or for further work. And we also provide the forward programme as well for consideration. We review them with the chair and we'll continue to do that over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, sorry about that.
You're keen and eager.
I was keen to remove lots of these. Can I remove 83, 108, 134, and then on page 150, 87, and on page 150, 122. So those are all ones that were recorded against my name. I'm not quite clear why we go back in numbers.
I think the last maybe in the completed so yes, so
I'm happy for them to.
that's fine. So we'll,
Did you get those?
we need to repeat those.
Pass down on my list.
Okay. Thank you. 82, I was confused on 82. Is that still happening, or has it happened, or?
So if we move to committee.
I will check. There are a couple with Lisa. I will at least check and
Yeah,
make sure.
I'm not sure if I remember that.
Yeah.
Will be provided, yeah.
Take those away, Chair, to speak with Lisa.
Yeah. Any other comments on any other items?
So the forward programme still doesn't have which are compulsory and which are not.
This was published before we had the conversation, but we will have Callum and I are meeting later this week, Callum, I think, yes, make sure we allocate the forward programme.
Do you want to just explain, because that was a conversation.
Yes, so the conversation was very helpful around which items are statutory, which have to come to the committee, which are required to be produced, so that it's clear that we make sure those happen, but also that those are the ones that are not compulsory. It's best practice. We just took another way of looking at it as well, which is completely escapes me. You mentioned something the other day, Councillor, about annotate it further.
Yes, it was simply a case of just understanding which specific items in the forward plan had to be there from a strategic point of view, which would just then
Sorry,
review
yes, yeah.
which
Yeah.
ones, if we needed to move the best practice, we have more space to get
Hay fever.
Okay, can we just look at the,
Could I just caveat that with sometimes the accounts, whilst they're statutory, you've got to see them. You can't whip in to a particular meeting. So I'm sorry.
there's no problem
Like
at all.
that.
We're going to talk about the committee, aren't we? On the committee.
Yeah.
July meeting, just a quick cast down July meeting, anything you would like committee to come at the July meeting that isn't listed there?
Do we believe we will be going through the accounts anyway?
So you will
We'll be
have,
acting with it
sorry.
tomorrow going through.
sorry, Councillor. So you will have the draft accounts for 22/3, which were published on the 31st of May. And the annual government statement draft, so they're for you to consider them.
Yeah.
You won't have audited accounts, and you'll have the draft accounts. We had to discuss with the chair removing the strategic risk register for the reasons we talked about earlier. Progress on internal audit work because with the money done in a couple of weeks worth of work. Those two items will be coming up. The rest will be coming here to that meeting.
And then the September meeting, do you want to discuss dates while you've got the committee?
Yes, I understand there's been some discussion around moving the dates, Callum.
Yes. So, yes, so from what I understand, there is a particular report that Grant Thornton wouldn't be able to bring on the 18th. They could bring in the last week of September.
Which should be their audit of the 22/23 accounts.
Yes.
But given all we've heard earlier from
Yes.
I'm still not convinced, but there we go.
Yes.
So what are you suggesting to the September meeting?
So my initial amendment was the 26th, but having heard what I've heard tonight, I'm not so sure that's the best option.
So should we take that away,
You
Chair?
did, and actually, we need to know that probably as.
And soon as.
Yes.
In the diary.
Yeah.
Because I know the end of the month is when I get very busy.
Yes.
Yes, I know Lisa Taylor was very clear that if, subject to if when the audit starts next week, they will be ready to bring them into the council in September, towards the end of the month. But given what Mr. Cuttle said earlier about the uncertainty from the public around the scope and nature of the audits, that